All right. Good evening, everybody, wherever you're joining us from. You're welcome to today's webinar, which is our preparation for our main event happening tomorrow, Powering Mobility and EV Ecosystem with AWS. Today's webinar is the third of a series, and it's going to be a very impactful and exciting time, right? So today, the topic of today is the future of electric mobility in Nigeria, policies, opportunities, and national strategy. And to take the webinar of today, the speaker of today is the person of Mr. Akin Akingbogun. My apologies if I didn't pronounce that well. So he will be taking us on this webinar today. So I'll just do a brief introduction of Mr. Akin. So Mr. Akin is a man who refuses to fit into a single box. By day, he's a co-founder and vice president of mobility at Qoray Mobility and Energies, driving Africa's electric vehicle revolution. By night, he's a published author, life coach, and a self-proclaimed Duke of Small Talks, with over 20 years of experience spanning civil engineering, business leadership, and social entrepreneurship. Akin is the kind of person who makes things happen. Right? Mr. Akin is a registered civil engineer with a master's degree in water and environmental engineering from the University of Lagos and an MBA in business marketing. He's also a current certified engineer and a member of the Nigerian Society of Engineers. But here's the thing, his credentials don't tell the whole story. What really defines Akin is his relentless drive to create impact, whether it's through transforming industries, mentoring young professionals, or telling stories that move people. He's a man of many parts, a strategist, and a mentor, a writer, a speaker, and above all, someone who genuinely believes that the right mindset and determination can change the world, right? So, for the sake of time, I want to hand over to Mr. Akin now to begin the session for today's webinar. Mr. Akin, please, can you confirm you can hear me? So you can.
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. If I'm audible, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So you can use the plus sign to add your presentation to the slides so that I can share it live.
Right. I just have a couple of slides here and there. I don't have all the slides in one place. So it means I have to select the slides that I would have to put up. But notwithstanding, okay. I would start the conversation. And then, right. You know, while we're at it, I would go on. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Prince, and thanks for the introduction. I think the introduction would have been very simple if you had just said, you know, I'm a business executive with Qoray. Now, Qoray Energies and Mobility is a new energies company that is focused on increasing the adoption of electric mobility and also the adoption of solar energy systems across Nigeria. Now, the interesting thing about it is our vision basically is to impact lives, which means that we need to look for those sectors, those two new energy sectors that we believe are important and would help to impact lives directly. And I'll explain a lot more as we go. Now, the conversations today speaks basically around the future of electric mobility in Nigeria. But in my opinion, it's one of the most talked about topic, maybe even sounding very cliche in its approach, because everyone wants to find out what electric mobility is about and all of that. But, you know, we are not exactly as prepared as we should be for that future that we're yearning for. The other question about it is whether the future is already here or it's a future that we're anticipating. right? So the conversation around today would look at the problems, would look at the policies that exist, and then would also speak to how the future would look like from this point on. Now, electromobility basically speaks around introduction of innovation and technology into the existing transport systems that we have. It doesn't seek to replace what already exists. That's the traditional systems. It seeks to provide an outlet where value can be abstracted within that space. It's a space that has been there for decades. There are infrastructure that have been built around the traditional transport system, fueling system, technical repair shops, automotive industry, and all of that that's supporting the fossil fuel use of the vehicle. So those are some of the things that are very critical and very, important for the use of the vehicles. But interestingly, having electric vehicles come into the mix means that we begin to look at the sustainability values, we begin to look at innovation, and we look at technology advancement, injecting all of this into the existing transport system and seeing how we can provide an outlet for value to be abstracted. All right. Now, the next question you'd want to ask is that it means that it runs as a parallel on the existing transport systems that we have. We're basically trying to electrify the transport system. So we're running on the existing transport system that exists, but in an interdependent way. So in essence, we may have electric charging stations coexist with the existing transport system, or we could have them independent, completely parallel, and still utilizing part of that existing infrastructure system, the roads and all whatnot. But then let's go back. Let's come back a little bit and come back to the center. The first question you'd ask is, what exactly is wrong with our transport system? And I'll just point out a few things so that we can pick the conversations from them and understand why electric mobility becomes really pretty important for us. One of the first things bedeviling the transport system in Nigeria is that it's very cash dependent, right? It's cash dependent at every point in time, whether it's we're paying, you have to pay for your fares. Just a few part of our transport system is very formal and that requires digital payments, and that's what you see in some parts of Lagos where you have the BRT and the Cowrie cards that runs currently. It's been in operations for a bit. So in essence, there's a lot of cash transactions that happen within our transport system. The other thing that you also need to take note that is a key feature of our transport system is that the vehicles themselves are very old, right? So we have aging vehicles that require a lot of maintenance, which means it hits deep into the economics of the vehicles, of the transport system, transport operators. So we have aging vehicles that have been in operations for a long time and we're not getting enough spare parts to replace them. So the vehicles are breaking down and they're not even able to comfortably move people from one point to the other. We also must note that we do not also have enough vehicles. So there's a high demand for transport. Every economy of any country depends on a very efficient transport system. What we have is there's a dearth of transport system, of transport vehicles, whether it is from the 3-wheelers to the 2-wheelers or down to the 4-wheelers or even the buses. We do not have enough of this to move as many people as possible, right? And so there's a dearth of vehicles, which means any vehicle you come in, for as long as you put into the transport system, there's a good chance that you'd find the right demand and it would become economically viable. The other part that we also note about our transport system currently is that it's fossil fuel dependent. I mean, over 95% of our vehicles are run on fossil fuel, over 95. And whatever is left that is outside 95, we'll be speaking to CNG or, electric, which is just less than 1%, and any other form that is not fossil driven. A lot of our vehicles operate on petrol, on diesel, and any other sort of fueling system that you can find, like CNG, which has recently taken a bit of a forefront. So it's highly fossil fuel driven, which means that we have environmental issues to talk about when we talk about these vehicles in operations. I should also move on to say that the transport sector is also very informal. It's largely informal. You have all kinds of players in that space. They are not, the governance of the transport system is not very straightforward. It's not very tidy. And so you've got vehicles that are not registered, vehicles that do not pass MOT. You've got vehicles that are unsafe, you've got all kinds of vehicles running in an informal system. They do not conform to standards that are known globally, and the behaviors of those who even ride the vehicles are not very, 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 very proper in that sense. I'm trying to choose my words very carefully. The sector is also very informal. It's largely informal, which is what I just said, and very unstructured. Perhaps I should call it poorly structured, right? Because there seems to be some level of structure within that space as well, but it's not as structured as it should be. And when I say structure that allows for intermodal travels to happen, where you could, for instance, use the bus, the train, and the waterways, all in a bid to get to where you're going in a seamless way. So it's not structured such that each of all of these different transport systems, for instance, in Lagos that would exist, do not connect in a way that allows you to transit from one point of the state to another. And this is even speaking of Lagos, which is, arguably the most advanced, urban developed environment here in the country. I mean, other parts like Port Harcourt and Abuja would also suffer the same fate. So we do not have that sort of intermodal system that allows the vehicles to run. So what all of this just points out is the fact that nobody will be willing to invest in the transport system in the country because there's very high likelihood that you may not be able to recoup the investment you put in there. No one is going to be able to finance that sector as well to solve all of this problem because there's no comfort in knowing that you can get your money back. It's not structured. There's no digital payment systems. The vehicles are old. They break down often. You're not guaranteed. And then you do not have credible data from what currently exists because it's not structured. So what that begins to mean is that there's this huge struggle, to fulfill, to attract the sort of investment that would allow that environment to grow. So enter electric mobility. Electric mobility does not solve any of or all of the problems, but ticks off some of the boxes. For instance, you are able to basically bring in a few things to even out some of those concerns. One of them is that it's sustainable because the vehicles are not fossil driven. They do not generate the kind of waste and compound carbon emissions that we're trying to resolve or trying to comply with. And I'll speak to the policies that already guide all of that. It also means that it's sustainable because the vehicles are, different. The approach to using them is also different. The vehicles themselves they allow us to be able to have a transport system that works because the vehicles are more reliable, the vehicles are good for the environment, and it allows the economic value that those who are operating those fleet operators to make more money from it. It also layers innovation, right? Because each of these vehicles, you're able to see them remotely. You're able to shut them down if you want. You're able to see the battery capacity. You're able to see all of that would give you more insight into how your fleet would operate or how the vehicles would move around and get data. You can extract data from these vehicles without necessarily having to install extra trackers and extra technological innovations to make that work. So it comes in to solve the innovation problem. It comes in with technological advancement that allows you to those who own the assets to get data and to qualify for transport. For financing, sort of. And of course, it gives economic value to those who ride them because while the actual cost of the vehicles may be very high, the capex cost is extremely high. The opex for these vehicles are relatively low and cheaper. So the amount of money that it costs you to transit or to move from one point to the other with electric mobility is cheaper per kilometer than you would when you use diesel or petrol. All right, so there's the economic factor that allows it to make sense. Now, the adoption of these vehicles, which has started in the last couple of years, especially just around the time when the subsidy was removed, which, by the way, is the most significant policy that has kickstarted that revolution for electric vehicle. Because the moment that in 2023 that the subsidy removal was announced, it meant that a lot of options became available to all kinds of people, all kinds of players within that sector. Those who had been toying with the idea of converting those vehicles or providing charging infrastructure and all of that started experimenting with what the nascent stage of the market would be like. All right. Now, some of the biggest problems bedeviling the adoption, obviously, is the fact that the vehicles are expensive, which means there's an high upfront cost, which is the capex that you need to grapple with. But if you look at it from a TCO point of view, which is total cost of ownership, what you'd find is that over the course of 3 to 5 years, your electric vehicles would far significantly do much better than in all ramification than the fossil fuel equivalent will do at the same time. Right. So now with this introduction, right, I then would like to go down into some very critical conversations around policies and where we are right now. So let's start. We can't talk about the future without looking at the past and looking at the future and the present. So what we have seen is that there is a lot of vehicles coming to the country now in the last 2 or 3, 5 years. And significantly in the last 1 year, there's been an uptick in the number of electric vehicles coming to the country. And the spaces where the nascent state of the market is allowing for this to thrive would be, the first would be commercial fleets. So you've got those who are riding in ride-hailing, bringing in vehicles, because the immediate impact is felt from the vehicles. The immediate impact is felt directly while you're using electric vehicles when you compare it to fossil fuel for commercial fleets, especially for ride-hailing, because one of the biggest cost components for those who operate these fleets is the cost of fueling and, of course, maintenance. Those are two critical components that electric vehicles are able to knock off significantly from the OPEX point of view. Now, the other part, which is very significantly driving the adoption of electric vehicle in Africa, not just in Nigeria, is the light EVs, the 2-wheelers and the 3-wheelers. Now, the light EVs basically are one of the most sustainable, well, not sustainable, most pervasive, most common forms of transport in Africa compared to other parts of the world. And it basically shows that the adoption of electric vehicles in Africa would be completely different from what we've seen in the first world countries. It will be significantly different. It will be significantly different from what we, my apologies, from what we've seen in first world countries, because one of the chief means of transport in Africa or anywhere else in Africa, in Nigeria in particular, is the motorcycles and the tricycles. These two forms of vehicles transit, they move between the last to first mile of these vehicles. They move to last to first mile of our houses. And that's because even though Nigeria has over 60,000 kilometers of road, a good chunk of them are not exactly motorable. And those last miles to our houses are the places where these tricycles and motorcycles commute the most easily, and not just for carrying passengers, but also for moving cargo and goods from one part of the state or anywhere you are, from one part to the other. So they represent a significant number that moves people around. And the adoption of electric mobility in Nigeria would start, or in Africa, anywhere else in Africa, would start from electrifying the 3-wheelers and the 2-wheelers. And that's where it becomes pretty interesting, because some questions begin to arise. The charging infrastructure to support it, the technology, the technical know-how to support the adoption of the vehicles become talking points when we start looking at it. So while I'd mentioned that ride-hailing is one of the most is viable in urban setting in that sense, but the actual revolution would start from the 3-wheelers and the 2-wheelers. Okay, in the nascent stage. In the next stage, we would probably max out the 2-wheelers and 3-wheeler stage before we then start looking critically at increasing the retail adoption of the vehicles. That's regular people buying corporate fleets, replacing their fleets with electric vehicles. And the adoption will start from the corporate world before it then goes down into the retail part of it. Now, that adoption will depend a lot on a few things, one of which would be the charging infrastructure that will support it. Now, for transport, you look at electric buses, and we've had some organizations who have brought in electric buses. And some of the things they have to look at would be even the moral case of whether you use diesel to charge these buses and then transfer the costs. It doesn't make sense if you think about it that way. So it means that we start looking at connections to grid, we start looking at whether the grid is stable enough to support it. It poses yet another sort of problems. But when you look at the two-wheelers and the three-wheeler space, because the battery sizes are smaller, the energy that is demanded from these batteries are not significant. And that can be provided by solar energy and renewable energy. And that allows us to be able to integrate renewable energy solutions into electric mobility that allows it to be fully sustainable. So the adoption of electric vehicles, like I mentioned, starts with two-wheeler and three-wheelers in rural areas and peri-urban areas. And because they would have access to this renewable energy or mini grids, they can charge the batteries and support them with other means of other sources of energy, which could be either CNG or even the grid. Okay, so that adoption is strengthened by models. It has to be strengthened by models that allows them to work, because the fleet has to be commercial first before it goes private. It means that a sustainable model that allows for other players to go into that ecosystem becomes very critical, because what we're doing is you're creating an ecosystem that allows the tricycles and motorcycles to thrive. One of the critical components of that ecosystem is the fact that the batteries can be charged outside the tricycles or motorcycles rather than having them to wait in situ. Now, what I mean is when these regular tricycles or motorcycles that run on fossil fuel drives into filling stations, they simply just have to wait 2-3 minutes, especially when there are no queues, to refuel, and then they move on. Sometimes they fuel as much as 5, 6, 7 times a day, just so that they can manage the cash flow as it comes. Now, you want to replicate that system. Remember, I started by saying that we can layer on the existing transport infrastructure. So if you want to have to make sure that it works for them, you don't want them to stay and charge their batteries for 4-5 hours using solar or any other source that you have. So what you rather do is to have the batteries charged outside the vehicles, and then the tricycles and motorcycles simply goes to swap it. This is not novel. It's not anything. It's innovative, but it's not novel, especially because some of us have done it. In Qoray, we've deployed about 2,000 of these tricycles across different parts of Nigeria already, and they have been running on that in that model. Now, talking about the ecosystem, that's the most critical part of the ecosystem. Other players in the ecosystem would be those who provide power. So it could be providers for mini grids. It could be those who are able to provide power as a service to charge the batteries. So they are a player in there. There's also the batteries itself. The battery banks has to be probably owned by someone. So imagine this, that when you have your normal vehicles running, they have to go into a filling station to buy fuel. The person who owns the filling station doesn't own the vehicles. The vehicle guys are just regular guys who come in to buy fuel. And the fuel on the ground, in the underground tanks, belong to the dealer, and he turns that over to keep himself in business. So the same way, we're copying that same tradition, that same model, where the batteries can be owned by someone entirely different from the owners of the batteries, of the tricycles, even though they need to swap it. Other players in that space would include those who provide financing, because the operators who will be desirous of picking up this tricycle do not have the wherewithal to do so. They may not even be bankable. They may not even be, they will not have all requisite documents or requirements to access financing. So what then happens? The model would require somebody to stand in for them, whether it's from the union or association point of view or from an aggregator point of view, who stays in and then allows, provides corporate guarantee and all of those requirements, allows for the financing to go down to the operators. The operators, so it covers for them. If they don't make up the monies, it covers for them. It puts the money in place to recover them, puts the structure in place to recover, defaulters and all of that who are supposed to make their regular payments on a daily basis. Now, I also spoke about the fact that the transport sector is bedeviled by cash, right? At the point of swapping the batteries, cash does not exchange hands. Each driver or each operator has a card. That card is tapped on the cabinet where the batteries are kept in slots. When they charge, when they have a digital wallet with money, enough cash in it, they can swap a battery by simply tapping the card on the sensors on the cabinet, and then it pops out a fully charged battery, and then they can swap it with the ones that they currently have. All of that process might even be far lesser in time that they would spend in filling station than they would at the swap site. It takes an average of 3 minutes to do all of that, because first, when the card is tapped, it has to be read with the logic to find out if first they've done financing, they've paid back whoever it is that they're supposed to pay on a daily basis for providing access funding for the tricycles. They need to pay for the cost of swapping the batteries themselves. Those are two critical payments that would happen at that point, and it has to be done with a card, which would be digitized. Now, when that payment is received, it would flow and go into different stakeholders. It means the guys who have provided power as a service knows how much he's supposed to earn as a fraction of the swap amount. The guys who have provide financing knows how much he has to earn. The guys who provide technology and payment solution knows what to earn. And for every time a swap is done, all of these partners get their funding, or they get their returns almost instantaneously. So what that means is, when you look at that, when I spoke about investment into the transport sector, now any of those who have put in financing or invested into that ecosystem can immediately see what is happening on a day-to-day basis, how much money is coming in, how many swap is completed, and all of that. Our jobs then becomes much easier because we're keeping the integrated ecosystem running, making sure that the tricycles are available for preventive maintenance, maybe every two times in a month, making sure that spare parts are available, training the locals on how to assemble these tricycles or motorcycles and make them available for people to use. All right, so now this has already happened, so it's not exactly the future, because it would sound novel, like I mentioned. It's innovative, it solves some of the problems, it removes cash, it's sustainable. The assets are newer, so they're not aging. They are increasing the number of vehicles that are available, so they are coexisting what already exists. Whatever it is that exists is an addition to it, and it's also solved the death of electric vehicles for transport. It becomes a bit structured because now payment happens and payment can be split across all of those who are playing in that ecosystem, right? And the interesting thing is you are also able to access government policies that allow you to progress that conversation. Let's speak about the policies, because it then becomes an important point of view. I'll start first by talking about the concept of net zero. Right, the concept of net zero itself is an idea about how the amount of greenhouse gases that we have to take out because of the amount of greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere. So basically, what we're trying to do, net zero means you're netting out in and out the amount of greenhouse gases and emissions that you're putting into the atmosphere, and you're making sure that you're also retrieving it by doing some other sustainable, innovative practices. And what 145 countries who have a legally binding commitment to reach net zero have done is they all signed that pact to see that on the average between 2050 and 2060, they are aiming to reach net zero. So they are saying to you that for as many of these vehicles or any of these processes or businesses that we currently do within our country that contributes to the carbon emissions, we will also have initiatives that remove at least that equal amount of those carbon emissions, or carbon that we're emitting, greenhouse gases that we're emitting into the atmosphere. Now, transport sector, ironically, accounts for over 25%, just around 25% of the the contributions to the greenhouse gases and emissions. So having to go electric on that front becomes a priority for a lot of the countries. There's the agriculture, afforestation would also help to mitigate it, and some industrial practices that needs to, be controlled based on policy point of view. So since net zero becomes what a lot of countries have signed up to, Nigeria also, as a party to it, has also signed to that global race to net zero. Nigeria set its target for 2060 for overall net zero target, which is, it's short of what 30-something years from now. But not just that, we also plan to have 100% of our new vehicles to be zero emission, to comply to zero emission by 2040. So, and that's, in my opinion, a bit, ambitious. It's not impossible to be done, but it's pretty much ambitious for us as a country to do. We have some policies that we've also set up. One of the, apart from, I mentioned that, in my opinion, the most important policies that has allowed for this transition to electric mobility to happen in this country is the subsidy removal, which has been pretty much very well talked about. But the second to the fuel subsidy removal in 2023 would be the electric vehicle transition and green mobility bill. This one is one of the most talked about and excited one within the electric mobility space. It has passed the second reading as at November last year. And its primary objective is to transform the country into Africa's first vehicle manufacturing nation. Right, which is really interesting because basically we're saying that we want to source about 30% of the components locally. One of the major components for electric vehicles is the lithium-ion batteries, which I know that Nigeria has abundant lithium ions within the country, which means we can access and maybe even produce the batteries here. That would knock off a good chunk of the production cost for these vehicles. It will allow us to be able to produce batteries, assemble the vehicles here, and maybe even access some level of funding that will allow the industry to grow. So basically, the bill, at the end, the bill basically is targeting a ban on the importation and sale of internal combustion engine, and it targets 2025, 2030 for local component sourcing. So it's an interesting analogy. It says 30% of the components will be sourced by 2030 locally. It will become the cornerstone of Nigerian e-mobility strategy, and by the time it is fully passed and becomes start being implemented, we will be able to have a local supply chain and even a competent workforce that could drive the adoption of electric vehicles. So that's one of the most next important policy that government has done. Another policy that we've done will be the waiver for taxes that you have to pay for clearing these vehicles when they come into the country. We have access to the IDEC portal where you can get some waivers on sort of custom fees and levies that anyone who's bringing these vehicles in would pay. The intent is, for as long as you bring the vehicles in and they're electric and you've gone through the regular processes with the relevant agencies, customs and the rest of them, you're able to access this waiver and translate that cost into savings that regular people can then access to buy the vehicles. So in essence, this directly affects the high upfront cost of the vehicles, because if those waivers do not exist, the vehicles would really be even more expensive to buy. There's also the Nigerian Automotive Industry Development Plan. For the adoption to happen, those policies have been carefully planned to support the Nigerian automotive industry. The intention is to create an enabling environment that industrialization or manufacturing of these Nigerian-made vehicles can happen. We already have a few companies in Nigeria that are currently assembling vehicles, although fossil fuel related. But with the support of NEDDC, that has actively been partnering with a lot of organizations in Nigeria to advance electric mobility, this initiative with the Nigerian Automotive Industry Development Plan would help to advance that conversation to manufacturing. Now, we all know that Nigeria is not exactly a manufacturing country, but these plans with good intention and championed and managed by NEDDC would help us to get to the point where we can begin to assemble the vehicles here. NEDDC is one of the few government agencies that are playing a key fundamental role in the advancement of the adoption of electric vehicles. They are operating from the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. And so they are responsible, they're tasked with coordinating that overall policy implementation for the EV sector. So the transition to EVs, for some of the things they have done, they started out by building charging infrastructure, integrating renewable energy with the EV charging infrastructure in some of the universities across the country. And that has become, available to those scholars for research to determine and design such solutions, for private use or, when the system begins to develop. Other stakeholders are the ETO, there's the Energy Transition Office, which has the mandate to, push for all the renewable energy plan and some of the other initiatives that the policies have set out for energy. One of those initiatives is the one about the Electricity Act of 2023. It helps to liberalize. I think basically, I like to use the word democratize, but it's actually liberalizing electricity generation, transmission, and distribution in Nigeria. It means state governments can then begin to work with the private companies or private companies, basically, to participate in that power market. They can provide the infrastructure and support to provide, to supply electricity, dedicate lines that can be accessed for charging, for instance. And this significantly would help give the confidence to more people who have range anxiety about electric vehicles to access electric vehicles. It would help to push the adoption, because once you are confident that you can charge your vehicles on the go, then there's a good chance that you'd be open to buying one and using one, right? So the electricity act, in my opinion, might be one of the most significant one that helped the infrastructure that we're trying to develop for it. Once the state government understand the importance of electrifying the transport sector, that allows us to access green financing and all of that from other agencies like green funds and all of that, then they would begin to integrate charging infrastructure to support electric vehicle adoption in the country. And this will also ensure that there's the future demand for energy, not just for electric vehicles, can also be met sustainably. Right. So I've mentioned about 3 or 4. I mean, if we were to stay here, we'd probably talk a lot about this. So let me speak now to the future, the actual future of these electric vehicles. Now, what's going to happen next is we already know that the 3-wheeler and 2-wheeler space will become the first point where electric vehicles begin to gain traction, and that's been happening already. We'll begin to understand how other players can come into it and everybody can benefit. So it's not just the operators that are running, anybody else can go into that space. You can own the assets because you're confident that the payment system will work. There will be those who are providing internet access, data management, those who are providing technical support. For everywhere where these tricycles have been assembled, whether it's in Oyo, whether it's in Uyo, whether it's in Delta, somebody has to be trained on how to assemble these tricycles and put them to use. And once they are trained, it's an upskilling, right? Upskilling of the existing technical support, the technical team that you have. And they will then begin to provide that service across. Then you have others who are trading spare parts for these vehicles. You want to buy an electric vehicle, someone will provide you supply chain for the assets, for the spare parts that you need to run them with. You have a second life for batteries in the mobility sector. These batteries, when they start not being available, or when they begin to degrade and they're not optimal for its use for mobility, they can be readapted, they can be repackaged and used for providing power for houses, especially in remote areas, and even for street lightnings and all of that. So the second life of the batteries become important, especially if the quality of batteries are good. There will be standards. There'll be standards basically across the country that will be enacted, will be signed into law, which would enforce the way vehicles will be used, the way the setups for charge point operators would work, and the conversions that are happening would follow standard procedures as well. This could also govern the kind of vehicles that are imported into the country and the kind of charging infrastructure that would support their use. So as we go, what would happen is, once the commercial environment, the commercial fleets are beginning to use these vehicles, data will become available for financiers to begin to invest and finance that sector as well. So what we've done in this country is, what is happening in Africa is that we are skipping some of the steps. It's more like when we skipped the landline. We never got to use the telephone landlines to optimal use before we skipped it and moved down to mobile. We're skipping the peak use of fossil fuel driven vehicles and moving down to electric, but starting it our own different ways, because 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers are unique to our own climate, to our own climb in terms of our road network and the infrastructure gaps that we have, including power and road. And so our development is going to be unique. It's not something that already exists in China or in Asia or in Bangladesh. It has to be unique to us, a solution that solves our own problem. And it will evolve very fast as more people start to understand how it runs and are trained in its use and believe that the vehicles can solve the problems for them, especially the economic problems when you get more money by using the vehicles, or they save more money by using the vehicles. I think this is one where I could want to just stay for a second and get a feedback from anyone else who has a word or two to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that session, sir. Thank you for the impact so far. So we have quite a few questions, and while you were talking on some things, you answered about 3 questions that I was about to ask. So we're just going to go straight into the questions because we have a few questions here. So the first question we have here from Adesua. The first question we have from Adesua here says, what excites you most about the future of EVs in Nigeria? What excites you the most about the future of EVs in Nigeria? Then, is the EV vehicle cheaper than fossil-driven vehicles? So maybe you tackle those 2 questions together.
Thank you, Adesua, for the question. I'm going to answer them just the same way you've posed the question. First is what excites me about the future of EVs in Nigeria. I think we are already beginning to see that level of excitement. The fact that it changes the way we commute. Not only are we able to move quieter, it also contributes to the climate. We're not making things worse for ourselves, even though Africa itself hasn't contributed the worst part for climate change, right? The target is to keep the temperatures rising below 1.5 degrees centigrade so that we don't have permanent climate damage to the earth. And so knowing that having more vehicles come on board would mean that less harm is done to the environment. And that's exciting to note from a sustainability point of view. But the other part that excites me as well is the economic value that it brings to the table. The fact that we can solve some of the fundamental problems that we're grappling with currently in the transport sector simply by introducing the innovation that electric vehicles bring on board is a very exciting thought to harbor. It allows a lot of things to support it, to grow, to improve, to support it. So for instance, because we want to go cashless and we have a vehicle that basically you can integrate even payment system with the vehicles themselves, it means technology has to improve to support it. It means internet has to, become more quality. They need to push it up to the point where it becomes quality to serve that intended need. It means that fleet operators need to improve how data is collected and how it is analyzed. It just shows a different style and different way of life for those who run and would benefit from it. So there's an economic value to those who run it. The operators basically would spend less to commute. Their OPEX spend is about 40% less than what they would have done if they were still running on their regular fossil fuel vehicles. Not only are these vehicles smart, the vehicle can tell you your driver behavior, you can manage driver behavior, we can train drivers on all of these things. The vehicles are customized to people's use. It's different. It's a different way of life. So the excitement stems from the fact that we can solve environmental issues and slow down the damage to the environment. It also says that we can get more economic value for people around the world. Yes, it is more expensive to buy electric vehicles. I mentioned that earlier, than you would have bought. Nigerian market is 90% fairly used, and electric vehicles are presently coming as brand new vehicles. So if you have brand new vehicles coming in and they're slightly more expensive, then it might discourage people from adopting the use of these electric vehicles. So what then would happen is that we would have to provide some level of financing. This financing will allow people to uptake these vehicles conveniently by just paying maybe a 10 or 20% equity contribution on the cost of the vehicles, and then they can then use the vehicles and finance it over a period of 5 years. Banks like Sterling Bank and Alternative Bank, who are primary supporters for Qoray, are providing finance, and there are other banks, commercial banks in Nigeria, who also support that whole process. But the advantage now comes in from the OPEX point of view, because you're not changing your oil every 6 months or 3 months or 4 months. You're not also buying fuel every day, and the cost of commuting of using electric per kilometer is far cheaper than you would use petrol per kilometer or diesel per kilometer. And that's where the real gain is. And that's what anyone who's transiting or trying to adopt electric vehicles would gain the advantage. I hope that clarifies.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So I have the next question here, also from Adesua. So the question is, what role does AI play in optimizing EV charging networks and battery performance? What roles do AI play there?
Thank you. Fantastic conversation. Very, very fantastic conversation. I mean, AI is redefining a lot of things, not just electric vehicles, in different parts of the economy. And one of the very most critical components for an electric vehicle, whether it's a four-wheeler, two-wheeler, or three-wheeler, is the battery. And battery performance becomes very key to the value, that economic value that I mentioned that we can get off these electric vehicles. And AI basically helps us to understand driver behavior. So, for instance, Qoray currently uses AI for managing interactions with driver and driver behavior. We are able to collect data from how they are moving, how they are driving, and compare this at the speed of light to the value and revenue they are bringing on board, and then know that we can recommend drivers for retraining and using simulators that we purchase for that same purpose. AI can help us gather data, help us see trend analysis, and that would help business owners to take decisions that would improve their business operations, basically. For the charging network, one of the interesting things that we could also use AI to improve on is, I mentioned it, this is the next stage that charging business would go. More people who have vehicles would want to schedule charging. You want to book a time when you want to do your fast charging. You want to come in to a particular charging station at between 1 to 2 o'clock, and you want to know that that space was reserved for you because you booked it online. Now, this is one of the interesting things. As the network begins to grow, it will require a lot of, computation, to see how you can manage the number of requests that you have. And then it helps you to determine, AI can then help you to tell which of the trends, which of the times that people are very keen on using the vehicle, because you're looking at trends. It could help you analyze data that then can help you improve the network that you're setting out, right? So it helps to optimize the use of these assets so that the utilization rate of the assets can go up. One of the biggest parameters for measuring performance of charging network is the utilization rate of your chargers, right? Qoray currently has about 10 charging stations across Lagos. And one of the things that we critically keep checking on is what the percentage of utilization of these chargers are. When we're talking to funders, when we're talking to those who are willing to finance us, they are also keen to find out how those chargers are utilized, because that utilization rate guarantees a return on the investment or the financing that's been availed to the operators of the charging network. So AI basically lets you see what the trend is so that you can optimize your operations and improve the utilization rate of these chargers that can allow funders to have the confidence to invest in the charging network. And for the battery performance, it is also able to tell you, because the driver's behaviors and how they drive would affect greatly how the battery is depleting. And with AI infused into the infotainment of these vehicles, especially for the commercial fleet owners, it can advise and recommend for training when you match what they are bringing in as revenue to how they are driving. And when I say how they are driving, how often they are stepping on the brake, how fast they are moving, and the kind of the conditions that they subject the vehicles to. So these behaviors significantly affect the performance of the batteries. And that information needs to be processed so that those drivers can then be either retrained or, taken off from the fleet. I hope that helps.
All right, thank you very much. I hope that answered your question, Adesua. So the next question we have here from Paul. The question is, we have very nice policies and documents, but the implementation is usually the problem. So given your experience in this field, what are the local barriers to policy implementation?
Right, absolutely. We don't lack the idea. We don't lack policy. We don't lack any of those things. I can tell you that for free. And one of the biggest issues that bedevils us as a nation, or even generally most of Africa, is the implementation of it. The implementation is going to be largely driven by government in terms, because those policies are established by them, and then they need to saddle agencies with the responsibility to implement them. And I mentioned earlier about NADDC taking up the taking up the foremost position in driving some of these policies, especially for the industrialization of Nigeria to produce and manufacture electric vehicles. What would help the implementation of all of these policies the most would be the synergy between the private sector and the public sector. Enabling policies are in place, expected it to be consistent, so that when government changes powers, it would not affect these policies and the fact that we're trying to implement it. So basically, we're saying policy somersaults becomes a thing of the past. Once that consistency exists and people have the confidence, or investors have the confidence that that's not going to change, they can work with the policies that the government has put in place. So, for instance, the fuel subsidy was removed. Government, in return, offered the CNG as an alternative. So, because the price of fuel went ridiculously up, the incentives were put in place for drivers and car owners to transit or to move from fossil fuel to CNG, either by having their engine run on both or on one. Now, that would require a lot of infrastructure setup, right? It would require other players to come in. It would require agreements to be signed with the gas production players within that space. It will require pipelines to be laid. There will be virtual pipelines. There will be physical pipelines in place. There will be substations. Then people would sell the compressors and the machines that's required for them to supply at the right pressure to the vehicle. So the policy just creates that environment, that enabling environment. And then what happens next is all the players who have confidence in the fact that there will be no policy somersaults in Nigeria will then start investing, first as a pilot to see how it works, develop a model that is workable, and then scale it up by investing further and attracting the sort of players that would make the ecosystem work. So the interesting thing is, yes, the policy is required, but the ecosystem would begin to build and protect itself to get it to work. And that's what's happening in the electric vehicle space. Now, we, for instance, we have co-located our chargers in certain places like hospitality, malls, and all of that. And what you see is even those owners are beginning to understand the importance of having those things in there, because as the vehicles come in, the drivers have to wait for a few minutes and hours, and that contributes a footfall to their business. So by simply decentralizing power, liberalizing electricity, governments can supply a dedicated line, which is part of the implementation, that those who are running charging infrastructure can connect to that particular dedicated line, and businesses can begin to move into that dedicated line with a new tariff system. Footfall from those who are riding the vehicles or driving the vehicles can then start patronizing the system. So the system would basically find its own level that would make it work. Government will not come in and slap people's faces and say, by force, by fire, this is time for you to do this. No. They just have to create the environment that is enabling, and then the rest of it would work with the sectors that will come in, both for financing and for operating.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. So we'll just take two more questions. So the second to the last question is also from Adesua. And the question says, what will you say is slowing down the adoption of EV in Nigeria?
Two things, basically: the high cost of acquisition of these vehicles and the depth or deficit in charging infrastructure to support them. Now, at the earlier stage of the market, there were just a few charging stations here and there. Like I mentioned earlier, Korea has about 10. But the vehicles are coming in flood. They're coming in large numbers. We're seeing 50, 20, 30. There are about 20, at least I can count off my finger, about 15 or 20 of them who are fleet operators who are already coming into the country and bringing vehicles in. But nobody's talking about the charging infrastructure to support it, because the capital cost of setting up that charging network is significantly high. And so what's going to happen? More players will have to come in. What would encourage them to come in? such policies like the one I mentioned earlier would encourage them to come in. Data that is available from those who are currently playing, that is available to those in the funders and financiers who would say, oh, now we understand the utilization rates, we understand the risk in this business, we understand the policies that government has put in place, and we're willing to invest or finance those who are able to go into that business and show the expertise and the skills that is required. So the growth of electric vehicles in Nigeria will be very organic, right? As long as the policies are there, the growth will be very organic. People will come in, invest, they will run it, they will see the economic value, then they begin to pitch to those who are going to invest, show data that shows that they've not only understood how to run and operate these businesses, but they can confidently pay back on loans or confidently provide value to investors. Then the adoption would quicken. But by nature, there's a demand for cars. There's not enough cars to move people around in this country. If you look at the number of cars versus the population we have, we don't have enough cars to move people around. So by default, the demand is a lot more than the supply. So as long as electric vehicles can come in because of the policies that government have set, like the waivers and custom excess duty waivers and all of that, then vehicles mix would have electric vehicles coming in, and the use of it, the confidence that we get from knowing that there's the technology know-how, we have technicians that understand how these vehicles can be repaired, then more people would adopt it. It's almost a case of chicken and egg. The more cars, the more electric charging station that must be in place. But it will be slowed down if we start having incidences like battery fires, lithium-ion quality batteries are coming in that when you charge them starts exploding. It will become a problem when such things happen, because then it will mean there will be a failure in the regulatory processes. You remember when we started having gas explosions in some part of the country, when government then comes in and then starts putting up regulations and all of that. Rather, those things should have happened first, but they were happening afterwards, right? So that could slow it down, because then it will make people start wondering whether it's safe to do. I mean, do you know that having a CNG tank in your vehicle is even more risk than it is with the batteries in electric vehicles? But, as more people are aware and knowledgeable about electric vehicles, the more the adoption will increase. So the less people know about electric vehicles and how safe they are, the less they are likely to move and adopt the electric vehicles, despite the fact that it's fancy, it's almost like futuristics. So those are some of the things that can slow it down. If government has goodwill to promote and to enforce and implement the policies that they put in place, the adoption would also increase. That could also slow down. But I want to state it here that yes, it is important for us to have enough power to drive the infrastructure growth that would support electric vehicles, but it's not the most primary part that would increase it, in the sense that grid power is not the only source of power that we have in this country. We are finding other ways to provide electric charging that would support that ecosystem. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir. So the last question we're going to take today from Paul says, so for the average Nigerian family already juggling generators and inverters, how realistic is adding an EV to the mix?
Thank you, Paul. It's very realistic. There are certain things that, it first sounds outlandish because it's the first time we're hearing them. The more information we have available, the more confident we get about decisions that we want to make, right? It's just when you have to spend 110 or 120,000 naira to fuel your vehicle from Monday to Saturday to go to work from the mainland to the island, for instance, or from Lekki down to Victoria Island on a daily basis, and you have an alternative to spend only 20 or 22,000 naira to do the same trip with a vehicle that you only have to charge once, then it's an economic decision and conversation. It's not a conversation about whether it's fancy. So the conversation is not about fancy. Yes, the vehicles come in and they look really nice. They don't have buttons. The infotainment screens are beautiful to look. The cars are sleek. But the biggest advantage is the fact that your cost per kilometer is far less than what you will be with a fossil-driven vehicle. So it is real, because I have had to use the vehicles, connect them to, you can charge them at your house. So you're not even required to basically charge them in charging stations. You can have a home kit installed. In fact, most companies will sell electric vehicles to you, would sell them with a bundle charger or with an home kit, a wall charger, which will be installed in your house. So the same way, the The same way you charge your phones at night, overnight. You just connect your vehicles overnight. It charges till the morning, 6-7 hours, your car is up again. Those charging stations I spoke to you about are just for top-ups. Simply just go in there and get enough juice to take you back home. So it is realistic. It is realistic. And then the last part to put in there is to say those vehicles, when you charge them overnight for 6 hours or 7 hours, like I mentioned earlier, the amount of electricity consumed is equal to you running your AC. 2 ACs that are 2 horsepower for just about 4 or 5 hours in terms of amount of electricity used. So that AC that you're running and running for long hours in your house, if you do have, if anyone runs on that, would simply be the same amount that you'd use to fuel the vehicles in a overnight and enjoy the benefits for over 5 days, depending on the range that the vehicles can offer you. So it is realistic, very, very.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. This session has been really very impactful. Very, very impactful. Like so much. Really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate how you handled and tackled each and every one of the questions today. So we're going to draw this session to a close now so that we can all prepare for the main event tomorrow. Thank you very much, sir. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We also look forward to seeing every single one of you tomorrow for the main event at Federal Palace Hotel, Lagos. It has been a good time. It has been an impactful time today. So this draws a close to the 3-day webinar series that we've been having in preparation for the main event, Powering Mobility and EV Ecosystem with AWS. So tomorrow we're going to be having the grand finale, and we're going to be seeing everything. We're going to be having exhibitions. We're going to be having panel sessions. We're going to be having a hackathon, right, of solutions that are being built for EVs, mobility with AWS and the cloud infrastructure. So thank you very much, everyone. It has been an amazing time. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a nice day.